Let's talk about a group of warriors that was said to have engaged and defeated the Atlantians in combat and razed one of their cities. A group of warriors that managed to survive in our collective memories across the ages. On today's episode, let's talk about the Amazons, legendary female warriors of renown. Hello all you wonderfully funky people, Funky Monkey here, welcome to today's episode. Long time no see, how are you? How's life treating you? Hope everything is alright. I was absent for a while as I was on vacation and then I fell ill for a bit and that kinda took me out of circulation, but now I'm back and ready to share epic stories with you. But before we get into our story, let us talk about what I'll be painting today. A while ago, I started a journey and I invited you to join me. I started painting Sisters of Battle, belonging to the Warhammer 40k universe. For each one of them, I chose a different technique, or I tried spending more or less time painting. In essence, with each one I experimented something different and learned something new. Today, we've reached the end of that journey. Today, I'll be painting the 7th and final Sister of Battle that I have. I will start with a zenithal that I applied with an airbrush, and then take each element of the miniature one by one. For the cloth, I will apply a layer of scent primer from Vallejo, and then go in with several nuances of red, going brighter and brighter. For the shadows, I will use Nuln Oil, while for the final and most popping highlights, I will use a few shades of orange and finish with a basic skin tone over which I will apply red glaze to tie everything together. For the armor, I will go with black and apply multiple hard highlights with Thunderhawk Blue, Fenrisian Grey, up until Stone Grey. I will highlight every edge of the miniature and thus separate it into segments for that sharp, clean look. For the backpack, I want to give the exhaust a scorched look and have blue flames shooting out of them. And of course, I will give the orbs on top of the jetpack a bluish energy glow. That's about it for now. Sit back and enjoy the story. Alrighty now, let's get our ducks in a row and go through the pre-story checklist, make sure we have everything we need to make a great story even better. So, I don't have any coffee at this point because it's way too late in the evening for some coffee and I want to sleep tonight, at least for a bit. But I do have some awesome ice cold tea in my mousse cup. I also have something for the soul, and I have my wonderful assistants around here somewhere. I'm sure they're gonna make an appearance. Potato was just sleeping behind me, but it's okay, they're gonna be gracing us with their presence later on. How about you? Do you have something tasty to drink on hand, get you in the mood for some history that you can use in your fantasy worlds if you're into that, or simply use to bore the living crap out of those around you? Perfect. Then I think it's time for a story. There are many legends and opinions surrounding the Amazons. There are sources that talk about their exploits and there are, and were, skeptics who doubted their existence even in ancient times. But what's the truth? Were they real? Were they the mighty warriors that legends speak of? And can we use their story in our own homebrew worlds? Well, let's tackle these questions and several others one by one. First off, where do they come from? Their origin story is quite simple, and if you've seen some of my previous videos around legendary creatures and or individuals, you'll understand what I mean. Legends have it that they were the daughters of Ares, the Greek god of war and courage, brutality and bloodlust, and the nymph Harmonia, meaning harmony. See, nothing special, right? Their parentage is quite interesting though. The god of war and the spirit of vengeance on one hand and the spirit of harmony on the other. Sure, it does sound a little strange, but it is what it is. Hang on, Mango is finding a cozy spot right next to me. Okay, now where were they located? Where did they live and hail from? The ancient sources are divided on this. There are those who mention that their homeland was in modern-day Anatolia in Turkey on the coast of the Black Sea, while others mention that they inhabited the steppes to the north of the Black Sea in modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia. Let's see what either Sorry, Mango is... Hey! Okay, so let's see what either side brings to the table. For the Greeks, the Amazons lived on the edge of the known world, and this edge got further and further as time progressed and the Greeks explored more and more. You'll see what I mean in a bit. The sources that place the Amazons in the Middle East mention their capital city as being Themyscira, a city in Anatolia on the shores of the Black Sea. They were mentioned to have founded multiple cities such as Sime, Sinope, Priene, Myrina, Smyrna, Pigela, Mytilene on the Isle of Lesbos, and the best known, Ephesus. But if you know your geography, you know that, for example, Ephesus is on the southwestern coast of Turkey, so not really on the shores of the Black Sea. This is because within the group that mentions them in Asia Minor or the Middle East, there were those who mentioned them inhabiting Lycia and Caria, the southwest part of Turkey. This position also granted them easy access to the Isle of Lesbos. But as the known world expanded and the, let's say, fog of war lifted, the Greeks tended to move the Amazons further and further away to the north and east. On the other hand, we have those who mention them inhabiting the eastern coast of the Black Sea, modern-day Armenia, Georgia, and southern Russia. These sources tell us that they were nomads that came from the east and migrated in those particular areas, bringing their warlike lifestyle with them. And I won't spoil it, but there are plenty of archaeological evidence that support both ideas, both sides. Through that particular area, so between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, many nomadic people have passed throughout the ages, and any number of them could have been at the root of the legends of the Amazons. The difference between these two sides, these two sources, is that they come from different moments in time. The first, mentioning the Amazons in Lycia and Caria, faded into mythology. They are very old even by ancient Greek standards, while the second set comes from around the 5th century BCE, when many of the written sources actually mention the Amazons. But there is also a third explanation when it comes to the location the Amazons hailed from. Both sides are right. None of them are wrong. They both hail from Lycia and Caria and from the eastern coast of the Black Sea. But we'll see if this holds water as we go through our story. Earlier I mentioned that there were skeptics that doubted the existence of the Amazons even in ancient Greece. The ancient author Paleaphatus, in his work on Incredible Things or Incredibilia, states that because Amazons were not around in his time, then they most definitely were never real. Hard to argue with that, isn't it? At the same time, Paleaphatus might have not even been real himself, as his work or works that were attributed to him survive only in Byzantine editions of Incredibilia. And those are basically reprints of reprints of reprints of writings from ancient times, even for the Byzantines. Now, for a moment, let's assume he existed. We won't go into his philosophy and the foundation of his works. Suffice it to say that he believed that behind every story and myth there had to be a real event that was taken by poets and historians and altered in order to awe their audience. In light of this, his theory regarding the Amazons was that they were actually men who were mistaken for women because they tied their hair back, wore clothing that reached below their knees, and shaved their beards. So of course the Amazons couldn't actually be warrior women, but actually be warrior men that were taken by poets and historians and turned into women in order to awe their audience. Of course, this theory has many holes, but sure, it's this guy's theory. Now, let's talk about how they procreated. If we have a society of only women, how do they procreate? According to legends, they were, of course, very independent, very warlike, and they lived on the coasts of the Black Sea, which, for the ancient Greeks, was kinda the edge of the known world. Legends tell us that their territory bordered that of the Gargareans, and that once per year, the two people would meet for 2 months in the spring and get it on. There were a lot of customs and offerings and sacrifices surrounding these meetings, these annual meetings, but they did meet and procreated. Any female born to an Amazon would be kept and brought up in their customs, while any male would be sent to the Gargareans to raise as they pleased and saw fit. Now, for the etymology, what does Amazon mean? Where does the name come from? Again, we have several theories, so let's quickly go through them. One myth about these warriors was that they burnt off or cut off one of their breasts so that they could draw their bows better without the breast getting in the way. The term used by the regular people in ancient Greece for this was Amazon and was understood as breastless. According to historian Adrienne Meyer, this might have originated from a confusion between the word mazon and the Greek word mastos, meaning breast. So basically for the for the Greeks, it meant breastless. Alternatively, the term Amazon could mean one breast or not breastfed, which I personally think is more plausible. Another explanation is that in Armenian, Amazon is a variation of this word refers to the moon goddess on the southern shores of the Black Sea and whose priestesses would be armed. But the simplest explanation is usually the right one. In Persian, ancient Persian, Amazon means warrior, plain and simple. That's it. No complication, nothing about breasts, just plain warrior. The idea that these legendary warriors would mutilate themselves to better draw bows is not supported by ancient art either, as there is no representation found thus far that shows a one-breasted Amazon. They were, however, represented with their right breast covered, perhaps in a leather piece so that the bowstring would not chafe. Having said that, let's talk about the general representation of Amazons and the adjectives used by ancient authors to describe them. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian and geographer, names them androktones, meaning slayers or killers of men, or androloteirai, meaning destroyers of men or murderesses. They also were called antieneirai, meaning equivalent to men, while Aeschylus names them stiganor, meaning those who loathe all men. Most often they were depicted mounted, wielding bows and spears, sometimes even axes and battle axes, and wore hoplite armor. They were described as being master horse riders, expert in cavalry charges and ambushes. In a fantasy world, Amazons can easily find a comfy place and be the legendary warriors that they were in our history as well. You can make them bloodier or, why not, much more civilized. They, let's say, willingly weave nightmarish tales around themselves to keep others away or to conceal themselves or their true nature. I know, it's your world, you integrate them how you see fit. And with that in mind, let's take a quick look at the miniature and see how it's coming along. Now I'm focusing on the cloth. Starting with the scent primer, I then went with a dark red. I applied Nuln Oil to establish the shadows and then turned back to the initial red paint. Once the thin coat I applied is dry, I'm going in with lighter and lighter shades of red applied to smaller and smaller surfaces. Because I want a smooth transition, I'm mixing the new lighter shade with the previous shade in a 50-50 ratio, applying the layer on a smaller and smaller area. And then coming in with the highlight in pure form. And I'm simply repeating this process with every new highlight I'm applying. Once I applied my final highlight, I will come in with a red glaze to tie everything together and make it look smoother and silkier. You can stop with this step whenever you want, as with any other. The longer you spend on it, the more careful you are, the nicer it will look in the end. Or, the more chances you will have to screw it up. But it depends on you. Take your time, do it carefully, and I promise you will get the hang of it and make less and less mistakes. Of course, that's much more easier said than done, and I'm still struggling with this, but it's a good exercise. Let's continue with our story. What is interesting is that Homer drives home the idea that the myths surrounding the Amazons are very old, by mentioning that everyone around Greece knew them very well by the time he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey around the 8th century BCE. On that note, here are some of the myths and stories that circulated around ancient Greece that survived to this day. First, Hercules and Hippolyte. As you might know, Hercules or Heracles was cursed with completing 12 impossible tasks to atone for his sins, those of killing his children after being driven mad by Hera. Completing these 12 tasks would absolve him and grant him immortality, thus becoming a god. His 9th task was to steal the Amazon queen's, Hippolyte's, girdle. This girdle was a gift from Ares himself and was guarded religiously by the Amazons. There are two versions to this story. In one, Heracles gathers a mighty army made up of Greece's finest warriors and heroes, including Theseus, and the other where he sets at this task alone. In both versions, the recovery of the girdle is quite an easy task, with the Amazon queen handing it over willingly, given the sexual prowess of Hercules with both men and women. The version in which Heracles was at the head of a mighty army is the basis for a spin-off, because of course every such story must have a spin-off, and we will get to it shortly. What is intriguing is that the confrontation between Heracles and the Amazon queen is depicted on pottery 2 centuries earlier than the literary sources, highlighting the existence of these myths in the oral traditions long before they were ever written down. In those depictions, the queen's name is either Andromache or Andromeda, not Hippolyte, and the girdle is never depicted. Who knows for what the versions that did not survive time had Heracles face the Amazon queen. This is, according to mythology, the first time Greeks ever encountered the Amazons. The story of Heracles' encounter with the Amazon was carved in the frieze of the treasury of the Athenians at Delphi, built around 490 BCE, on the temple of Apollo of Bassus, on the Hephaestion of Athens in 449 BCE, and on the metopes of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia between 470 and 456 BCE, and sources have it that one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, had the god's throne decorated with this myth as well. A second story is that of Theseus and Antiope. This is the second encounter that Greeks had with the Amazons, and comes on the back of Heracles' expedition into Amazon territory and speaks of young Theseus, a mighty Greek hero, falling for the Amazon Antiope and kidnapping her. Later on, although he became the ruler of Athens, the Amazons did not fear the city's might and launched an expedition to rescue Antiope by any means. Theseus, having the strength of Athens at his beck and call, defeated the Amazon rescue incursion, but during the battle, Antiope was killed, thus gaining some sort of freedom in the process. The story of the Amazon Antiope being kidnapped by Theseus was carved on the pediment of the Temple of Apollo at Eritrea, dating around 510 BCE. Another story is that of Bellerophon and Amazons. This story represents the third encounter between the Amazons and the Greeks. Bellerophon was a Greek hero who was said to serve the king of Lycia, Iobates. In the service of the king, he was tasked with an impossible undertaking: to kill the Chimera, a fantastic creature with features of three creatures combined into one: a lion, a goat, and a snake. And this legendary mythical creature also breathed fire, so that was a bonus. Bellerophon managed to slay the creature, and upon returning to Iobates, he was given an even more unsurmountable task, that of fighting the Amazons. As you might expect, he managed to defeat the Amazons and returned victorious. Oh, and Bellerophon was the one who tamed the Pegasus, the flying horse, a horse that was a gift from his father, the god Poseidon. From this story we can gather that the Chimera was less of a threat than the Amazons were in the eyes of the Greeks. By the way, all of these myths supposedly date from before Homer ever wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, so before the 8th century BCE. Now, we come to an encounter between the Greeks and the Amazons that is mentioned by Homer himself in the Iliad. This story is that of Achilles and Penthesilea. So after Hector was killed by Achilles before the walls of Troy, the Amazons, led by Queen Penthesilea, came to the aid of the Trojans and started to slowly push back the Greeks. The Greeks turned to Achilles, who was recovering from the battle against Hector, and pleaded he return and push the Amazons back as they were being crushed. The Amazon queen was a daughter of Ares and another Amazon, Otrere, and a fierce warrior. She met Achilles in single combat, and after a long and gruesome fight, she fell in battle. There are some versions of this story that mention Achilles removing her helmet as she was dying, and he fell in love with her. This story has been depicted on a black figure vase made by Exekias, a famous craftsman around 540 BCE. These are some of the most important tales of Amazons that have survived the ages, but there are many more that have been lost to time and can only be seen as carvings on temples or depictions on pottery. Together, these general scenes are called Amazonomachias, or battles with Amazons. We have such carvings on Athena Parthenos' shield, a statue that is placed inside the Parthenon, or the temple of Athena Nike on the Acropolis, Tholos of Delphi, the temple dedicated to Ares in Athens, and many more places of significance for the ancient Greeks. The number of these depictions increased in the 5th century BCE during the period in which the Greek civilization was in dire peril from the Persians led by Darius and later Xerxes. As such, the Amazons were often depicted wearing Persian clothing as a method of clearly communicating to the masses who the enemy was, how great the threat was, being akin to that of the Amazons of old, and how the Greeks were triumphing over their enemies. A clever method if you think about it. These kind of stories are precisely something you could easily integrate in a fantasy world. Have legendary heroes go against legendary warriors and prevail, or why not fail? And besides losing their lives, losing the legendary weapons they wielded when facing the mighty, let's call them still Amazons. Oh, and before I forget, if you need some more convincing of adding Amazons to your world, let me tell you about something that an ancient author, historian, said about the Amazons. And this historian was Diodorus Siculus, or Diodorus of Sicily. He tells us one of the most badass stories you can come across. He tells us about how the Amazons under Queen Myrine invaded the territories of the Atlantians, defeated the army garrisoned in Kerne, and razed the city. They attacked Atlantians, the same people that legends say had flying mechanical birds and ships with no sails and no oars. The Amazons attacked Atlantis and won. This, in my opinion, this is an epic story and an epic clash. Like the clash between Godzilla and King Kong, but in Diodorus's story, one side was actually real. With all of that said and done, were they actually real? This is a question we will answer after a quick look at the miniature. It is now time to paint all the metal elements of the armor and equipment. The base I am using for this is gunmetal from Vallejo, and I'm applying it carefully as to not touch the areas already painted. Metal paints are a little trickier and harder to cover if you need to repair something, so take your time and do it carefully. You don't want to come back and retouch areas that have already been highlighted and finished. I will add shadows by applying a Nuln Oil wash, and once that is dry, I will come in with gunmetal again and bring back that mid-tone. The highlights I chose for the metal bits are two different shades of steel from Vallejo, steel and light steel. Although some of the decorations on the armor are supposed to be golden, they too will get a silver base and then a coat of gold, a wash and highlights. While this is drying, I'm focusing on the eagle insignia on the sister's shoulder. I painted it with off-white, I applied the apothecary white contrast from Citadel to add some shadows, and with bone white and pure white I'm adding the final highlights. While I'm here, I'm touching up the hair of the sister as well. And for the first time, I am painting the gods red. I felt it was only fitting seeing how this was the last miniature in the series. The edges of the guns will be painted in shades of orange for a nice effect. Okay, so the age-old question. Were the Amazons real? Short answer, yes, but it's a little bit more complicated. According to archaeological discoveries, the Amazons were actually based on the Scythian women. The Scythians were a nomadic people that slowly migrated from Asia to Europe starting in the 2nd millennia BCE and up until the 7th century in subsequent waves. As nomadic people, they would come in contact with other civilizations as they migrated, and sometimes, as they left an area, they might have not been seen for generations. This perhaps took them in the realm of myth for some people, until one day they reappeared on the horizon. As they migrated, they would also branch off in different directions. This means that they could easily have reached Lycia and founded Ephesus in southwest Turkey, while they were also living on the southern coast of the Black Sea in Anatolia, all the while also being spotted in modern-day Ukraine and southern Russia. What set them apart from most ancient and even medieval and even modern societies was that the Scythian women had the same rights and obligations as the men. They rode in battle, they took part in raids, they held high positions of power and were buried with warriors' honors. This was something unheard of in most of the ancient world. Again, even close to our time in the 18th century. Heck, Even in the 19th century, there were societies where women did not have the same rights as men did, and even to this day, we face the same problem. Anyway, Herodotus is the first to claim that they came from the east and into the west over the great northern steppes. In the 1st century BCE, Diodorus Siculus talks about the Scythian moving north from Armenia. Both of these statements are accepted as being true, although the fact that they went north from Armenia does not mean they originated there and not migrated there and then migrated back north again. Herodot also mentions that the Sarmatians So, Mango made an appearance. So, Herodot also mentions that the Sarmatians, the famous ancient mounted warriors, broke off from the Scythians and moved back east at one point. There are archaeological discoveries made in the Altai mountains that place the Scythians there in the 9th century BCE, and in the 1st century CE, Chinese historians mentioned the red-haired, blue-eyed Scythians being encountered. All the while, the Sarmatians were mentioned in Europe. Oh, and another subgroup or a related culture to that of the Scythians were the Hittites, the civilization that eventually at one point conquered ancient Egypt. Anyway, the leadership of the Scythian people was most likely a form of shared power among the rulers of different tribes. This is highlighted by Herodotus when he describes the defeat Darius I of the Persian Empire suffered at the hands of the Scythian when he tried to cross the Danube to the north. He tells us that although a high chief represented the Scythians in the negotiations, those around the chief also voiced their opinions. Those were lesser chiefs. Herodot also mentions that the Scythian women would tattoo their faces like the men did and bore weapons. Now, given the many archaeological discoveries and literary sources, the territory that the Scythians covered was immense, from the Danube in modern-day Romania and the Hungarian plain in the west to the Altai mountains in the east. As I mentioned earlier, women could obtain the same status as men did in Scythian society, and this is reinforced by archaeological excavations. For example, in 1993, a warrior's grave was excavated in the Altai mountains on the Ukok plateau. The grave contained many objects of high status and 6 saddled horses. This warrior was a female of high status given the contents of her grave. And according to research conducted by Barry Confield, a fifth of all the excavated warrior graves in Sarmatian-controlled territory were of female warriors of different social status. In Kazakhstan, many female warrior graves were uncovered dating from the 5th century BCE, so from the time Herodotus was writing about the Amazons. These female warriors were buried with weapons, armor and horse trappings, and also presented battle injuries from different weapons such as arrows and blades. On the Dniester River, on the north coast of the Black Sea, near the ancient city of Tiras, a Scythian grave was identified containing the remains of a woman who presented wounds to the skull, likely from a battle axe, and an arrowhead stuck in one knee. She was buried with 2 spears, body armor, 20 bronze arrowheads, and a bronze knife, all equipment of a warrior. Moreover, an analysis of nomad steppe graves done on graves excavated across Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, northwest Iran, and Russia reveals that around 37% of all of the investigated graves contained the remains of females who presented signs of injuries sustained in battle, that they either healed from or succumbed to. And they were all interred with a warrior's equipment. And with that, I believe that you have your work cut out. You have everything you need to easily include the Amazons in your fantasy world. You can easily create a society that trains their women to be fearsome elite warriors, and combining this with my previous video about Valkyries, imagine this. Amazons versus Valkyries. Now, that would be a tale worth telling. I have such a society in my world akin to that of the Amazons that my players have not yet encountered. This society sends out some of their young warriors that have not yet proven themselves in battle to gather experience in foreign lands, join mercenary groups or adventuring parties, only to later return, if they survive, to their secluded lands and impart what knowledge and experience they have gathered. I am sure you can easily come up with some lore behind such a society and culture. And with that, if you enjoyed this video and found value in it, please make sure you like, as this shows me it was useful. Subscribe and join this growing, wonderful, funky community. Hit the bell so that you are notified when the next video is out, and share it with your friends, your DMs, GMs, storytellers, creators, players, neighbors, family, grandparents, pets, everyone. Oh, and if you want to see more of my lovely assistants, make sure you check out TW-Creative-Cats, a channel with shorts that have nothing to do with history and everything to do with cat adventures. By the way, Potato's 12th name is of humans. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I truly hope you found some inspiration and learned something new today, and I can't wait to see you all funky people here next time on Funky Monkey MP. The place where you get your dose of miniature painting, history, world building, and trivia. Remember, be curious, take inspiration from the past, and never stop learning, world building, and creating amazing things, whatever those are. Your mind and imagination are awesome, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful, funky day. Cheers.